my current superhero comic show, this time from DC, Krypton. I know you've watched it quite a while ago, but yeah, I don't know. I've just been pretty, I guess, lazy watching it.
Because you're probably afraid, like, I don't know, this is touching on some stuff that I like, so...
Yeah, I don't know. I think the thing is, like, because I was watching, like, a bunch of other shows at the same time, and while it was running, I was like, should I watch it? I'll just watch something a little bit more safe than committing to 10 episodes. But, yeah, I started watching Krypton. And, yeah, it's pretty interesting, especially given from what I understand, like, the basic story was supposed to kind of be like a Man of Steel prequel. And that is kind of, sprinkled around in the show and the lore itself.
It really does feel like the first 20 minutes of Man of Steel. Like, it does feel like it would be set in that universe, like in that same thing.
Well, the main thing is, like, I don't know if it's like, because I haven't read too many kind of I guess Krypton origin / stories related to specifically Krypton when it comes to the Superman universe. But like my first kind of introduction with Krypton having kind of the Genesis chamber and basically having people not like have like conventional sex to have kids. Like they basically put in their like blood and then the blood gets your DNA gets scanned and then a random, well, not necessarily random, like a optimal child gets formed, and they get assigned, a position, whether it be like in the Science Guild or in the Lawyers Guild or whatever, right? It's quite interesting because it's basically in a way, like a lot of people kind of see this kind of future as being a little bit post-apocalyptic, whereas you have artificial intelligence basically dictating how human civilization or a civilization advances, right?
Well, we do have this technology. It's still early on, but we still have, I guess, the technology to, I guess, change different cells and genes actually these days.
We can do that like at a pretty fundamental level, but we're very far from ever doing it in like like kids, right? Like getting artificial insemination of a specific kind of DNA combination to have like what some people would like to call like designer babies, right? Like having like your kids have blue eyes and like this shade of hair and make sure like they all are like cancer averse and stuff like that, like kind of getting rid of all the bad stuff and keeping all the stuff that we want, right? Like we're very far off from that particular future, but like I mean there's the potential for it to get there. There's I think like there's in the show itself, a lot of that is, well, Kryptonians don't have kids through the conventional way. It's not really explained in so much as why they don't do it like in the conventional way. I know in Man of Steel, it's basically described as, well, because Clark was born like hidden, right? He was like born
out of the system, I guess.
Yeah, out of the system, and that's a really big deal because it's it's forbidden, right? And I think a lot of it is, at least in their society, is probably there's a risk of genetic abnormalities, disease and things like that, and so they don't want people to not be created outside of like under a microscope. But that kind of story I actually really liked in Man of Steel, because he basically is the first Kryptonian in like hundreds of years to be born and not have his destiny chosen for him. And they kind of touch on a lot of that in the Krypton TV show. And I'll give a bit of a summary about what it's about. So basically, it's based around Clark's great grandfather, Seg-El. And essentially, Adam Strange, who is a kind of like a, time travel hero from like the DC universe, is kind of like, pretty like low on the ranks of, he's not a Booster Gold in terms of like mainstream
popularity at all.
DC popularity in terms of time travelers, right? But he kind of comes back to Krypton to warn Seg of Brainiac coming and consuming Krypton, specifically Argo City. And yeah, Seg and the gang try and figure out we gotta prevent this or whatever. But I think it's an interesting story. I want to hear some opinions from you. What did you think about the story, Don?
Well, that's the thing. I feel like this TV show maybe gets a little bit too much hate in a sense. I think it's fine. It doesn't really do anything that special, but I feel like there's a lot of people out there that it's kind of like the hate that I guess Supergirl got at the start, where it's it wasn't CW that's doing it, it's Sci-Fi, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, we'll give it a bad. I feel like that happens even with stuff like Marvel's Runaways and Cloak and Dagger, which we'll talk at probably at some other point, where I feel like if it's not part of the main network, it gets more hate for some reason. But yeah, I feel like the story is okay. It's very interesting because once again, I don't know much about, I guess all the factions in Krypton, how civilization worked beforehand, and different gods and worship and things like that, and in I guess the Kryptonian world. So I really like the setting. Once again, I feel like the show gets better the more it goes on. You understand more of the characters, their relationships, and it really builds up to something. I think the first maybe 3 to 4 episodes are kind of very slow, really getting stuff going. But once they introduce a certain character and his actual name of the character, I think that's when stuff gets more interesting, in how everything works and structured. Because basically the main plot is time traveler comes back and he's like, hey, you need to save, Superman from not being born, basically to survive. But there's also a second threat going on where Brainiac kind of wants to take over Krypton, and it's just kind of dealing with, I guess, both situations at the same time, and they all kind of intertwine in a sense. So I think it's not that bad. I feel like in the second season they can maybe push it a little bit more forward, and because once again this show sets up a few things midway through the first season. I'm like, okay, you could really do some stuff with this if you get the chance to do a second season, which they do. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I think the thing with this show is I think the acting kind of suffers a little bit in the show because, or just maybe if not the acting, because the thing is I like the actors. I like kind of the thing. Okay, so the thing that the show really does well is the visual design, because I think what the show kind of makes me think of is Krypton is this cyberpunk future. That's basically what Krypton is. I never really thought about it before, but that is kind of what most, futuristic, societies are supposed to kind of be like. It's supposed to be cyberpunk or post-cyberpunk. But, Krypton is always kind of, at least in the TV, the animated TV show, even in Man of Steel, is kind of propped up to be this kind of...
Dying, right? Dying in a sense, though.
Well, dying, but otherwise a future utopia. Everybody's happy, all this good stuff is happening. But there's Jor-El, aka Superman's dad, is kind of trying to warn everyone, hey, this planet is going to shit. Let's save it, right? That's and then the hubris and kind of the impending doom, and everybody's ignoring it, leads to the fundamental death of the Kryptonian society as a whole. Whereas in this kind of interpretation of Krypton, it kind of describes it as, it is this kind of cyberpunk, dystopia rather than a utopia. So, it is kind of heavily military ruled. The High Council is, it's a religious, I guess, theocracy or religious dictatorship, so to speak. And there's a bunch of other kind of parallels to real society that, or rather real history that it kind of touches upon, which makes it really interesting because, again, it's not really an interpretation of Krypton that I've personally seen, or let alone from a mainstream perspective. So it's really interesting to see them do a kind of a dystopia, making Krypton looks like a dystopia rather than a utopia, which is what it's usually kind of portrayed as. So that's really cool. And I like the visual design. I think maybe people need to some people are like, oh, well, they're all dressed in leather, right? It's like, but, what do you want them to be dressed in? Like something like something that'll waste half the budget on? Like,
you're gonna be you're gonna be more like, realistic with this type of stuff where it's like, it's like, does it work in the aesthetic? If it does, and is it cost effective? Because once again, this is a show it has like 10 episodes, and there's some special effects in this show that are pretty well done. So I'm like, I'd rather put it to something that makes it more visually like cohesion than just like, oh yeah, but we have these futuristic tech stuff, but like we can't spend the money for some other stuff that happens. So I really liked how Brainiac looked in this movie. There's been some kind of versions of Brainiac that they've shown, like there's like I don't know if you ever if you've seen like the DC Universe Online animation that got released like many years ago. It's like this really cool CG kind of mini movie which basically sets up the plot for the MMO, and it's basically all the DC superheroes are like fighting all the villains, and Lex Luthor ends up killing Superman, and Superman's like, you killed me, but there's a bigger threat that I'm not going to be around for anymore, and it's like Brainiac comes in, and then Lex Luthor realizes he fucks up and goes back into the past and releases all these, I guess, like nanites to give people powers, and that's the basis of the movie. And you see like Brainiac in that, and Brainiac looks pretty cool in that show. I don't remember him. I know he's in Smallville, but I don't think I got that far in Smallville to remember what. Yeah, I remember seeing like stuff in Smallville, but once again, I don't. Yeah, it's way off in my memory somewhere.
Yeah. And I liked him in the DC animated universe. He's really cool in that. But like, this is a really interesting way for to see Brainiac, and he visually looks really cool. The other really cool, they don't have too much of him in it, and this is like not really that big spoiler, but Doomsday is in it,
and he looks more like Doomsday, sir. And it's very interesting.
It looks awesome. It looks super awesome. It's kind of funny that, like, if they were going to make this, they can no longer make this canon with, like, Man of Steel, because obviously we had our version of, Doomsday in the, DC cinematic universe.
I know, there has been rumors, like Zack Snyder said, oh, like, Doomsday already existed before the Genesis Chamber did it or whatever. It's, like, part of, like, the file somewhere, so... But once again, who knows?
Oh, really?
It's one of those things that you could easily just semi-explain or something. But yeah, like, Doomsday, like, that to me was like a big reveal. I'm like, okay, you're really pushing out the, I guess, Superman lore. And that's what I was like, man, people should maybe, like, pay attention to this show. Because it's doing some interesting stuff. And I think it'll probably continue to do some interesting things within season 2 and kind of push it. Like, I think that's one of the main reasons why I like the show, is that, especially early on in the show, it really does set up a few different, like, things like factions, like Game of Thrones type of stuff, where it's like, we've got, the Els, the Zods.
Vex.
Yeah. So, I really like that stuff as well, like the intrigue of that whole, I guess, how that works,
I wish there was a little bit more of that this season. Like, I know they probably, had like, hey, we only have 10 episodes, we can't, screw around too much. But I think I would have liked it if they had focused a little bit like that. It would have been interesting to have like a cyberpunk Game of Thrones-esque kind of show where they did have the political intrigue and stuff, but all of that kind of gets thrown out the window when Brainiac gets revealed, which is a bit of a shame. Hopefully maybe there might be some stuff that happens in season 2, but I think I would have really enjoyed it, seeing like something like Seg trying to claw his way up and I don't know, like, use his influence in,
politics.
Politics and, like, with the people he knows, we haven't revealed who's the person who kind of comes up in this show, but, like, it does have some pretty interesting reveals. I don't know, like, I'm interested to see where the show goes.
I feel like if you want to do a prequel, you gotta do it 2 generations beforehand. Something like Han Solo doesn't work as a prequel because you're like, I kind of know where this is going. At least with this, it's kind of like, this is a different character, and who knows, like, kind of like, there's some intrigue where it's like, oh, well, if you have a son, and is Jor-El, which is like, Superman's name, and then it's like, why is it the opposite house's name? Like, what happens in the future? And I found that stuff very interesting of like, oh, like, you know, do we get together? Do we not get together? You know, what happens in the future?
Yeah, like, you know, there's some, like, you know, romance plots that's, like, kind of shoved in it, but, I think, like, obviously, in context, it, like, makes a lot of sense for them to, like, have a little bit of relationship drama, because, again, like, you know, given, like, the world of, you know, Krypton and how, you know, people are binded together, they're, like, pre-made to have people, have certain marriages and certain couplings together, and that kind of gets kind of thrown out the window when, like, you know, you meet maybe your daughter from the future or something, even though we're kind of seeing that a little bit in The Flash in the next season. But yeah, like in this, it's always very interesting to see what they do, especially with time travel shenanigans. You can always come up with some random stuff. Yeah, I'd probably like to say that I didn't like some of the fighting in it. I thought they like the choreography. Some of it was like really bad.
Yeah, it's pretty. I think that's probably their weakest point. It's pretty weak. Like, I feel like they need to hire some people from like the Arrow team or something like that, and just be like, do some action with it.
Yeah, like, or something like, but that being said, like, every time they had, you know, the Zods on screen, like you had Lyta Zod, and her, you know, her mother, whose name I'm kind of forgetting at the moment, but like she's like a general, and like, yeah, she is awesome. I like seeing both of those two on screen and like fighting, and it's very much like how I would expect like that Zod kind of family hierarchy to be. Like, they're very strict, they're very like you know, methodical, they're very much like loyal to Krypton kind of thing. Like, it's always really cool to see them. It'd be cool to just see like a lot more different houses. Like, obviously we get like the Vexes in the I guess DC lore. I forget which the character's name, but Vex is actually one of Zod's like kind of underlings, is called something Vex. So, you know, it is kind of a little bit of a throwaway to be like, oh, hey, like she's like that person's like great grandmother or whatever.
Well, that's what I liked about the show. From what I can understand, it really knows Superman lore, I guess, and like really understands the world. So like, I think that's its biggest strength, and that's why, like, you know, it's like, I feel like, once again, there's probably too much hate in this show. Like, I feel like it can go places really cool, like, especially in season 2. Like, I feel like give like season 1 a watch at least if you're like interested in these like types of shows. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If you like DC, you'll like this show. If you like kind of like cyberpunky kind of shows, like this kind of touches on it. As Don mentioned, like, it's not something super groundbreaking, but I think it does pretty well at like kind of expanding the DC lore and adding some cool twists to it. And I'm looking forward to a season 2.